Welcome back. In this video, I would like to take it from where I left it in my previous video about mass media and add a couple of examples of issues that are neglected by mass media, by the traditional media. For instance, those of you who follow me in Twitter might have noticed that I didn't include many questions, among them the question about why the media miss the data about inflation uncertainty that is published by the New York Federal Reserve. And guess what? The vote of those making less than $100,000 kept some correlation, some decent correlation with the results of that chart. What is very telling about the people who write in mass media. Or let me ask excuse me, let me add to the Brookings institution recommendations about consolidating permitting at the federal level. My proposal to adapt it to closing the gap in housing, 4 million units, that the Niskanen Center also had reached similar conclusions, and yet the mass media has not brought the issue either on the housing level or on the transmission level, and that is very telling. Not to mention all examples I mentioned on foreign policy, and I could have added some other ones, like, for instance, Blinken's ineptitude with respect to the Ukrainian grain that creates unnecessary frictions with Poland. Well, there are many examples. Well, but those examples brings me back to the issue I covered in my first video, that is how to fix the system. And it brings me to the need of creating this range of rational ideas between the rational right and the rational left that I identify with a Roosevelt left. Some are left that is identified with the New Deal. If you ask the average man, even the average Democrat, what the New Deal was about, you will not be able to get an answer, because the media and politicians and activists have been completely, have failed miserably at transmitting a message that made Roosevelt the hero of the working class, who won re-election 3 times, while Democrats could not hold the White House even for 4. So we need this range of ideas, as I mentioned in that video, to make politicians accountable, which should be the mission of mass media. But we know that we cannot trust the traditional media. I have given in my previous video plenty of examples of that. But unfortunately, you cannot trust the internet media either, at least so far, because you find lots of childish proposals, like, for instance, cutting the Pentagon budget in $100 billion. Why not 50? Why not 200? Why not 1 trillion? If you tell me we need to audit the Pentagon and expose the incompetence and corruption that there is inside the Pentagon, don't forget that we have corruption. Is just that it's not the case of the traditional corruption, when you pay a dishonest politician with a bag of a suitcase of marked bills, but you offer him work after retirement, or campaign contributions, or the way corruption works in the first world. So if you tell me we need to audit, that's a reasonable proposal. If you tell me we have to cut $100 billion because why not? That's a childish proposal. That makes you look naive and unreliable. So let's go. Let me elaborate on my idea of this buffet of ideas. First, of course, you have to create the pool. Stage one, you have to create a pool of rational, relevant ideas, and so you can avoid, for instance, the embarrassment of Obamacare. Obamacare was an improvement over the status quo, yes, but it's bizarre, to say the least, that the signature bill of a president who rescued the United States from the Great Recession was Romneycare. And Romneycare was a bill created when Mitt Romney was the Republican, Mitt Romney, conservative, was a governor, and was crafted by the Heritage Foundation, that is ultra conservative. So if you tell me, well, could Obamacare work with a public option, then that we are talking, because unfortunately the results are not are there have been some improvement over the previous status quo, but not enough to compensate all the political capital that was spent on that bill, the 13 months that spent on approving that bill. And for instance, you could see that in Americans live 4 years less than Europeans on average, and other health indicators are still poor, and medical bills, that was the number one reason for bankruptcies, is now number two, but just number two. So, and yet being relevant is not enough. We will explore this in a little while. These ideas in stage two require visibility. Somebody told me, well, we need to get the Joe Rogans to talk about new ideas, about the New Deal. Yes, but then you have to give them some visibility so they notice the ideas, and then they pick up and give them a chance. If they are just in the history books, if you are asking probably too much. And I like, for instance, moving to another example, with respect to racial issues, I love, and social justice more than racial issues, I love the message of the Poor People's Campaign, but they have no visibility. Their messaging is trapped in the echo chambers of rallies that make activists very happy, but have don't let the ideas move beyond the echo chamber. Then, when you have to give them visibility, there also another requirement. You cannot transmit just hard data. You need narratives, and you transmit your ideas once you get the chance to give them visibility through narratives, and that's something in which we have failed miserably. Let me give you a few examples. The case of China, and I'm going to quote in the pictures. I'm going to be presenting uh, my tweets, yes, not as out of arrogance, but just to remind you that there are people who have proposed this issue, this approach before and have been ignored. So in the case of China, why not try to get an accommodation with China instead of pushing China towards Putin? In the case of corporate greed, like money in politics, are not issues that are, even though they are relevant, they are not salient because people don't connect them. Salient was, for instance, recently the inflation uncertainty, and it's still, the inflation uncertainty that has devoured the savings of the working class and turned them in against the Democratic Party. Or, for instance, on education, a public option on education with incentive for apprenticeship instead of the system of a two-tier system of waste and corruption. We offer the working class, where while Ivy Leagues get money, get education worth their money, and that is a real opportunity opener. Or in Ukraine, consider the stupid, terrible narrative uh, proposed by Biden, helping the small, we, the United States, are helping the small guy so they get in a fair fight with the big guy. That was a very stupid idea. And yet the public sided with Ukraine. If at least the Biden administration had given full support to Ukraine, that would have made the war short enough for the bad narrative to survive. But because they engage in this ridiculous rationing, the public support for Ukraine began to erode and eroded, because what should have presented, this war should have presented as what happens to the United States if Putin wins. I'm not going to repeat myself, or I have elaborated on that on other videos. Or, as I mentioned before, MLK, Martin Luther King narrative on social justice to counter the nonsense of defund the police, abolish ICE, and all those childish proposals that has hurt minorities more than MAGA could have done in their wet dreams. Or more recently, the case of Doggy, I proposed some time ago an upgrade and waste commission. So, because if you don't define the role of government, as for some stupid reason the Biden administration refused to do, your opponents are going to do. And Doggy is going to redefine, and you are not going to like the way they redefine the role of government. And if you are a Democrat, you need the government to work. And the trust in government is in historic lows. So even an idiot would have reached the conclusion that we need to reframe the role of government before our opponents do. And yet those ideas were not present anywhere. And even though we had parameters, because the role of government, you could have used the case of the New Deal during Roosevelt, or during Kennedy, the race to space race, and the way in which you could make government more efficient and or oriented to the goals that create prosperity for everybody. Now, that brings me to the stage 3. Is once, okay, you have this basket of ideas, right and wrong, right, excuse me, right and left, because you realize that you could not get efficient results getting the middle point between mag and woke. But then, and you give them visibilities, you give these visibilities to the narratives created out of those ideas. But then that's it. Well, no, that's not it. The next stage is and is to turn this mechanism into a facilitator. Let me use the example of heritage action for the federal level and ALEC that it does the same work at the state level and local level. These are extremely, and I must say, dishonest conservative, because there are honest conservatives, for instance, at the Cato Institute. But these organizations are very dishonest, but they are very efficient. They coordinate ideas, the ideas that created by the Heritage Foundation, and transmit them to politicians in the form of bills, to the media in the form of op-eds, articles, to activists in the form of slogans, and so they have multiple conveyor belts that address multiple purposes, and that makes sense in terms of political market strategy. Remember that politics is marketing, and they sell a product, because if you don't have a product, your marketing is nonsense. And for instance, let me bring here some more examples. Is the case of Israel that has been captured by the naive left in terms of siding with Palestine, as if this were a sport competition where you root for a team. You don't have to root for Palestine or Israel, because that implies identifying Israel with Netanyahu and Palestine with Hamas, which is what the stupid Blinken approach has done. And how do you start? You start with something like the Olmer plan, and it's not the only plan. In my video about Israel and Palestine, I mentioned at least another alternative. That's how you start generating ideas that could lead to sensible solutions. As I mentioned, in the case of the Putin, also we need to reframe the Ukraine war in terms of the national interest. Or in the case of China, also we can try to use the case of our relationship with Japan in the 1980s and 90s as a point of reference. And yes, that window of opportunity might be closed already because of all the stupid ideas that came from Jake Sullivan. But we have at least to try, and if not, we have to acknowledge that it's too late and prepare for war. Consider the pitiful situation of procurement in NATO in the case of the Ukraine war, the ridiculous appeasement of Biden and Olaf Scholz, and you will see that a narrative compelling action in one direction or the other, and that are not exclusive, as I mentioned, are missing. Or, for instance, as I mentioned before, consider the case of the healthcare. Healthcare is going to be one of the two main drivers of the federal deficit in the foreseeable future, and yet we are not addressing it. Obamacare has not worked as expected, and yet we are not creating sound narratives about a public option or a single payer or some other proposal from the rational right that might make sense, even though we have the experience of Social Security in the case of Roosevelt. So about how to sell a social program that is not considered relevant or salient at the moment of you sell, or at the moment you sell it. Or consider the case of the proposal I make on public education, because we, as I mentioned before, we have a two-tier system: mediocrity for the working class and top of the art for the Ivy Leagues, and how this could be seasoned with a strong apprenticeship program. And the German model is very good to use as a point of reference. And similarly, you can develop narratives for research and development based on Kennedy's space race, or transmission back securities, which is a proposal I made to enhance funding for the grid, in which if it's not the number one problem, it's still the number two problem, funding. Oh, the number one problem is the one I mentioned before, about consolidation of permitting, that makes renewable projects too long to finish, and so too vulnerable to inflation pressures. Or we can adapt that to immigration. I made a proposal like long ago, of which I made a summary on a video, in a previous video. We have the most important immigrant, Alexander Hamilton, and Alexander Hamilton could not have come legally with the current system, and yet we have a president in 2014 that was selling the Schumer bill as a bill that was going to send undocumented immigrants to the back of the line, even though there is no back of the line in the law. Actually, to make it more bizarre, it was the Schumer bill that was creating that line, because it didn't exist before. Unfortunately, the Schumer bill that didn't go through either. So far we have covered the idea that we need a sound basket of ideas on which we can develop some narratives, on which we can bring visibility, and how, for instance, many people can participate, people in think tanks, for instance, to develop, to polish the ideas, lawyer to polish any legal issue that may sink the idea, contacts in media, both in traditional media in the form of op-eds or the internet, activists that could turn those ideas into slogans, sellable slogans, and finally that could allows us to present bills. We can even use that to sell the mechanism itself, because this mechanism can infuse a new sense of pride among voters, because we can sell them the idea you can no longer fool us. Now we get to the stage 4, that is a strategy. By definition, a strategy is the way you match your resources with your long-term goals, and your strategy, besides all we have mentioned before, should take into account opportunity. For instance, as I mentioned before, issues like money in politics don't sell. You don't win, or the Supreme Court, you don't win elections with that, because those issues are not salient for the average voter. And on this, I would like to recommend two books, John Salers and Anthony Salvantos, that deal with this issue of saliency. But, and we can learn the lesson from Social Security. If you solve the issue that is salient, depression in the case of Roosevelt, you can open the door for other issues that are not salient, that you could not have solved up front, but then because you gain prestige and political capital, you can now sell, like Social Security. That's on which Biden failed miserably because he was too shy to tackle inflation as he could until it was too late, because once he lost the House in 2022, well, he lost all chance of using fiscal policy. Then I would like to finish this video by reminding you that if you wait for the time of the bill is coming, it's too late. You will have a bill that have no strategy supporting it, like the many immigration bills that have been created just to please cool activists that have no sense of strategy, or it would be too late to implement amendments, or to, for instance, to counter the attempts to dilute the bill and to make it unworkable. And that's one thing that inspired me to propose this upgrade and Waste Commission that would also have brought visibility on the maneuvers made by lobbyists to distort bills like the Volcker rule or the public option in the Affordable Care Act, or the or Trump's partial repeal of the Dodd-Frank on banking in 2017, that made a lot of damage to the supervision capabilities of the Federal Reserve, and we then were condemned to pretty much bailing out three banks quite recently to prevent bank panic once Silicon Valley Bank fell under. So if you wait for the primaries, it's too late. You have the option of doing the hard work now and then taking pride of having get something done, even if you fail, because at least you would get all that work ready to redouble your attack on in the next elections. And you may say that, well, but I am not a historian, I'm not an economist, I'm not a lawyer, so this project is probably not for me. Well, then that's not true. You could be wrong, because it's the arrogance of ignoring the real needs of the voters that has doomed the Democratic Party in the last elections, that has led to the working class to turn, and to Hispanics to turn against the Democratic Party. So the ways you can help are invaluable. You can share these videos. You can bring your opinions, your life experiences to be taken into account. You can recommend this so we can expand this platform to as many people as possible, as long as we share the same values. I'm a Roosevelt liberal. I am probably not going to like the ideas that are in the rational right, but they should be ideas I can live with. And in the same way, we could expect the same reaction from the rational right, because otherwise we are condemned to this loop of disappointment, to the middle point between mag and woke, and the future doesn't look so rosy if it is so. Having said that, let me leave you with our newscast.
Good evening. This is Brian Thomas Simons, and these are the main headlines of this hour. Among other news, CNN revealed that Prime Minister Netanyahu holds President Biden hostage until a new weapons exchange for Israel's IDF is approved by Congress. Speaker Johnson proposed to give a fast track to the debate as soon as House is back in session. New round of sanctions against Russia is announced. Secretary Blinken considered it unnecessary to explain why the other 13 rounds haven't worked. Secretary Anthony Blinken, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and White House Communications Advisor John Kirby are considering joining the cast of a remake of the classic The Three Stooges, which is expected to be brought back to life in a movie next year. The series, which has brought laughter to American families since 1922, deserved a remake, and the performance of Blinken, Sullivan, and Kirby convinced me that they would do a good job in the movie as the unforgettable trio. They were born to play that role, declared director Judd Apatow. This has been the news of this hour. Sponsored by Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Did you vote for Trump in 2016 and then in 2020? This is the right church for you. If so, Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit is the only Christian church that can promise you in the Lord to have 72 virgins in heaven for only a donation of $50 a month. You will have access to those 72 virgins in heaven. For an additional $25, you will be allowed to replace 10 of them, and for $100, Heaven Premium, you will be allowed to choose them for yourself. Guaranteed, if you're not satisfied with those 72 virgins after you die, full refund of your money. We accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover.